So welcome to my talk. This is going to be, it's called Dyskinetic, and how you can actually make a live-action virtual reality film. My name is Brenden Gibbons, and I consider myself a narrative designer. I've made a handful of VR works, but the most interesting ones are the films. So originally, I made a film called Dyskinetic, which was for the GoShort Short Film Festival, which was in Nijnmegen in 2014. And it was essentially, they sort of just asked, someone that I know kind of asked, like, do you want to make a film? I sort of said, why not? And after a few months of sort of making it, there's a hell of a lot of really interesting things about VR filmmaking, and I am not smart enough, nor do I have the money to really make all of those things that I'm interested in come true. So this is what this talk is about, hopefully to inspire you guys and to kind of show you how to get to where I am right now and where you guys can basically take off from where I am. But yeah, so made some stuff. Dyskinetic is a film, and then basically it was well received, so we made a second one. It's actually there's two different sort of entries, but we actually ended up making 5 different films. Dyskinetic is sort of a family drama where you wake up in a hospital room, sort of from a coma, and your family is around there, and they talk to you, and they respond to you, but you can't respond back. And they actually talk to you and refer to you as her or him, so there's 2 different films. The Prism is actually 3 different films, because it's one perspective told by one scene told through 3 different perspectives. And the idea is that you come, you watch the film together, and then you sort of figure out basically the mystery of the film. But that's enough about me. Like, I think something that's interesting is why VR films, right? Like, why do we want to make films out of VR? And we're kind of at this cusp of change. Like, I think as game developers or anyone working in entertainment, we're cursed to always be living in interesting times. There's always something going on and there's something new. And in VR films, it's not obviously as well developed or as democratized as game development. But we're at the stage where we kind of changed from, kind of this guy strapping GoPros all over his head to just consumer-ready hardware. They're still kind of filling out backlogs, but you can now start to buy cameras that essentially just give you 360 films. You don't need to rig them yourself. And they're sort of for around 300 to 400, starting to get cheaper as well. So you can find your own solution that works best for you. There's also emerging software solutions. Not all of them are good, actually. This is the biggest thing. We need a lot of new and a lot of better software. And hopefully, if any of you guys are interested, or if any of you guys are thinking of sort of for VR filmmaking and taking on that kind of role, this is definitely somewhere that there's a lot of work needed. And there's also starting to be large distribution platforms, which is amazing. We now, YouTube now has the ability to put in 360 films, and we have Oculus Share, and more we're going to have these distribution platforms, not only just for other developers, but for consumers. And from there, we can obviously figure out the monetization and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of reasons. I mean, it's a new way to share experiences. You can now be at a concert that you could never be in. There's potentially new genres of films. There's new interactions, which means new storytelling methods, new workflows, new medium that mixes game design, cinematography, interactive theater. Essentially, it is because it's new unexplored territory, just like any kind of VR. And we're sort of, it's not the first generation anymore. It's now this sort of second where there's new ground, the foundations have just been built and it's setting. But we need a lot of things and a lot of help to try and make things, to build on top of those foundations. And hopefully, you guys are interested in taking that on. So this is my personal workflow. It's not necessarily the best or the most interesting workflow, or the one that's going to be perfect for you, but hopefully from here you can understand how it works, and then from then on you can try and figure out what to actually do. There's just 5 simple sort of steps. You record the cameras with the footage, you cut it into individual frames, and then you stitch them. Essentially, it's just a panoramic video, right? And then you render it back into footage, and then finally you put it in Unity, you use the footage as a texture. So first you record the footage, and as I said, there's a whole lot of cameras that we can now just buy, but, well, starting to anyway. Hopefully, starting from probably around next year, they'll be readily available. But you can also just jury rig your own kind of creation and contraption. That one's literally just, it's me with 2 GoPros taped onto a box. That works as well, so you don't need a 3D printer to make your own. But if you're interested in jury rigging in your own thing, what's important is that the fisheye lenses is necessary to try and get the whole 360 or to get as many overlaps as possible. But the price isn't necessary for the process. So if you're interested in just doing something cheaply, there's actually multiple different solutions. So for the Prism, that was done with GoPros. We only had 2, so we ended up making a film that you actually had to lie on your bed and sort of lie on the bed, and then therefore we don't need 360. To rent that out, obviously it's just 120 euros. For the next film, The Prism, we used 4 DSLR cameras, and that's about 500 euros for a rent. But there is also just smartphone lenses. You can buy fisheye lenses for your smartphones. I'm sure everyone here has a smartphone and one friend who's probably willing to lend his. And from there, you can just try it out. And you can buy a smartphone lens for about 20 euros, and then just figure out, OK, so this is how it works, and then try the process out that way if they're interested. Next, we cut the footage, and you just basically use any kind of video editing software. I use Sony Vegas, but it doesn't really matter. You can use Adobe Premiere or that kind of thing. This is pretty, you just use anything that you're used to or you're interested in. And the only thing that I would have to say as a developer is you have to be prepared, because this is just one take from one 8-minute film, and it is 18 gigs, because it's from 4 cameras. And you sort of, when you cut the footage back from when you cut the footage from the footage into the image sequence, when you render it out, that 18 gigs turns to 90 gigs, 95 gigs. And that's just for a single 8-minute film. You have to sort of just make sure and be ready that, you kind of have the time, and that just make sure that you sort of set aside and know that this is going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a little bit of basically just almost trial and error. And obviously, you see there, it's all very nicely rotated, and it's all the same way up, and it's all nicely named. Yeah, you have to do that yourself. The rotation, obviously, that's going to be a few hours just on Windows Explorer. But the naming thing is kind of hell, so thankfully, there's something called the bulk rename utility, which just more than happy to rename several, tens of thousands of files in a minute, and it's open source software, so you can just get it for free. So these kind of things you just sort of have to be prepared for, unfortunately, or else you're going to waste a lot of time. And then next, we stitch the Panorama, and these are some of the softwares that are available. I've used PT GUI. I don't know how good the rest are. But this step is really problematic, because it's a hell of a lot of work. If you think about a panorama, it's about stitching together multiple images and making it look as if it's one, and as if it's perfect. And to do that for one is fine. To do that for many, using something like PT GUI to batch stitch 100 panoramas, 1,000 panoramas, that's okay. But the thing is, it doesn't understand that it's for a film. It doesn't understand. It just thinks that this is going to be one singular image. So it can't work out the foreground and the background, for example. It doesn't do it right. So if we look at something like, this is one of the shots that you just make, and as you can see, there's a hell of a lot of errors, right? The most noticeable is the ground, but you can actually see on the ceiling as well, sort of the light on the top right and that kind of thing. It doesn't look right, but that can be fixed, okay. That's relatively simple to fix, because you just need to render it out once more with the foreground intact, and you just replace it, because nothing moves over it. It's just one frame. It's not a lot of work. However, that person walking through, that will be a lot of work if the person walks through the seam. That's the biggest problem. There's nothing that just automatically stitches and understands that's a person going through. I need to keep that perspective the same. Or at the very least, PT GUI doesn't. And it means that sometimes you're forced to end up editing by hand about 200, 300 frames in Photoshop. And I have a very large respect for anyone who does stop motion now. It's hell. I don't want to do that ever again. But so if previous solutions, if more solutions doesn't come out, what I would suggest is basically think about it in framing, and that the different cameras are set a different way, that there's very little people walking through the lines, or else you're just going to have to do a hell of a lot of work. And then what we do is just to render panoramas back into using Sony Vegas, using that kind of thing. And again, I would have to say, just be careful, because now the working folder is about 200 gigs, and the film itself is going to be 100 gig. So just make sure that you have the space for it. And this is the kind of point where if you want to do any kind of editing, if you want to put explosions in your films, or, color grading, something simple as that, this is the point where you basically put it in. And Unity doesn't like huge files, so you need something like ogdrop, which basically just converts the film into OGG, which is what Unity likes, which means that you're not kind of stuck hanging around waiting for Unity's converter and then it failing. And then finally, we actually put it in Unity. We used there's a use footage as texture, and it's freely available for Unity 5, and it just works. You have to write a very small amount of code, so you sort of press a button and then the movie plays, and then that's it. So that's thankfully the easy part. For audio, for the Prism, we kind of faked a surround sound setup, but on the first film, it was just one speaker and then sort of having things left and right because it wasn't 360. Another possible option is to actually mic people up, like with these, with the lavaliers, and just tween the things as it goes around the camera. That's also a possibility. There's different kind of solutions. But yeah, there's a lot of, and that's basically just the core thing. You can work from that sort of as you want. Maybe there's some things in there that you're not particularly interested in, or like there's steps in there that you want to change. There's lots of things. It's just what I found worked for me at that particular time. And there's a lot of problems as well in sort of live action VR and sort of in general that needs solutions, that just needs working on. And I'm going to focus on two, which is the lack of real depth and the no cinematographic control. Obviously, we can't, having VR or having those things strapped on your face, it feels really weird to not have depth because we're so used to it, especially if many of us have already used VR before and we're used to actual just rendering of 3D models. It's obvious that it's 2D. So what can we do to just make it so that it's a little bit more depth? It feels like things are coming out, or we have that kind of distance between each other. Well, there is actually such a thing as stereographic 3D panoramic video. Just like normal 3D video is just two cameras, stereographic 3D panoramic video is two cameras everywhere. And those kind of solutions actually already exist, like this thing, which is a beautiful rig that takes up 12 GoPro cameras. And it's technically a solution, sure, but it's not really for everyone, because the rig itself costs $1,000. And if you don't have any GoPros, it's going to cost you $6,500. That's not a solution that's obviously readily available for everyone. So what can we do to try and make sure that we have some depth, that we have something that makes it look just a little bit more interesting, or we can play with that kind of effects? Well, the simplest thing is just using video layers. As you saw here, like in the first sort of slide, the thing in the round, in the back of it, that's actually the credits put onto a separate sort of sphere. So theoretically, there's nothing preventing you from recording the background and then recording actors, say for example, in a green screen room in the foreground, and then placing that on different layers so you can actually have that sort of depth. A second thing is you could, if you're really interested in having depth in sort of a VR film, you could just actually use PBR instead of having live action. This is from a game that Unity was sort of showing off called Pollen VR, and it looks absolutely beautiful. You don't have to use live action. Figure out what you're interested in doing and then what works best for you. But what I'm interested in what could be possible is a solution in the middle, and possibly something like live deformation. So because essentially we're just projecting the film onto a sphere around us, what if we could encode the depth information? What if we can know what's on the distance and what's actually in the foreground, and then make it so that the sphere itself, the thing that we're projecting to, changes, so then something actually comes closer to you and goes further away? I have no idea if that's even possible or how to do it. But these kind of things, there's possible things sort of in the future that might make these kind of films even more interesting, even more engaging. And then, yeah, there's just the cinematographic controls. The viewers, they're not filmmakers. What can we use? I mean, obviously, we can't really use something like a dolly zoom because changing the FOV makes people feel sick. Although it might be that you want that kind of effect anyway. And there's a lot of different things that we just don't know if we can use. For example, can we use picture-in-picture? If the film is starting from here, from where I'm standing, can I look at someone and then a plane would come up and show me a camera shot, essentially, of that person in a particular angle, so I know what to feel about this person. And obviously, we can have first-person films, but what about third-person? Third-person objective, where I can sort of see and understand what's going on, or third-person personal, where I'm just following one person and following their personal thoughts on it. There's a lot of different things that are just not tried out yet, and we need to sort of just create that language and make sure that everything sort of, we understand what kind of language to use when using this kind of thing. And basically, finally, there's just a few things that I want to show you to keep in mind when you're if you're interested in making these kind of things. And there's just basically 3 very important points. Frame rate and latency is always going to be a problem in VR. For film, a neat little trick is just basically by making sure that things are solid colors. So that curtain in the background is actually a terrible idea. Because in VR, if there's a judder, if you're looking left and right and there's latency, it's going to be very, very obvious with that curtain. If it's a solid color, then it won't be so much. So something like that, you have to sort of just keep your mind and sort of think about when you're designing the film. And there's also kind of the idea of the installation versus home consumption. The first film I made, The Prism, I knew that it was going to be shown at a film festival. I knew we would have complete control over how it was going to be shown. So that's why we chose that, okay, the film is going to be on a bed. You have to, like literally, I don't know how, but they managed to get an ambulance. So literally, you would go into this film festival, there's an ambulance outside with a line. You would go into this ambulance, sort of lie down on the bed, you would put on the Oculus DK1, and then you would wake up in a hospital room. And then everything sort of would start from there. But the second film, because we wanted sort of to show it for everyone else, or we wanted to make it a bit more open, every single person is essentially sitting down. And then that's going to be a completely different experience. So that's something you have to sort of think about. Are they going to be sitting? Are they going to be standing? What are they going to be doing? How will the audience consume the content? You have to sort of think about the whole sort of thing. And finally, capturing their attention. There's a lot of narrative space in a 360 shot. So imagine if you have a camera sort of, on a town square, you could literally have a 5-minute film and have an hour of essentially narrative encoded into that film, because you could just follow one person and that would be one story. But maybe you just decide to look at this person instead and follow him, and that would be a completely different story. There's so much space, literally, and sort of in kind of ways to basically tell a story that it's almost too much, because often cinematography is about what you don't put in the frame. So then level design has to take over. Then we have to use lights, we have to use movement, we have to use sound to just basically focus or make the player focus on something else, on the thing that we want them to, but without forcing them to. We have to just basically turn off lights on everywhere else that we don't want them to look at, turn on lights for this, and it's going to be difficult, or we can use sort of color grading or those kind of methods in post. And something that you have to sort of, I think, we're probably very likely to forget is, it's very much like theater. The actors are probably going to be doing it in one take, unless you're going to have cuts, and the cuts would be very weird. How would you have cuts in a sort of film? So you have to sort of think about how and where the actors are going to be placed in the actual space. And basically, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it's been informative for you, and I hope you're interested in sort of taking it on and figuring out what you can do next. Thank you very much for listening.